everybody, it's EK from EK Gorman Designs, and I am sneaking in today with an extra special video. The weather is getting cooler and fall is coming, so it is definitely time for a My Favorite Fall Colors at Craft Collabs video hop. The group of us are getting together and sharing our favorite fall color combinations. And today I am sharing not just my favorite color combinations in one medium, I'm sharing it in three mediums. So what you're seeing is three different stamped out images using a combination of archival ink and Momenta ink, depending on what medium I'm using, and it's on three separate pieces of paper. First project you're going to see me do is with alcohol markers. I'm using my Copics markers, and I'm using a piece of Nina cardstock for this because it is my favorite alcohol marker coloring medium. Excuse me as I zoom in a little bit. I figured everybody would want to actually see how I colored this a little bit closer, so I did a little zooming there. I thought it'd be really fun to do not only my favorite fall color combinations, but to show how I would do it in three separate mediums. So today I'm doing alcohol markers, colored pencils, and watercolor. And I'm using the same image for all three, and I'm using the same combination of fall colors. What are my favorite fall colors, you ask? Well, actually, it's browns. I am actually one of the few people who love the color brown. I love wearing brown, all different types of colors of brown. And when it comes to fall, when you punch in a little burnt orange and some bold red, I think you've got a glorious color palette. So today that's what I'm using. I'm using a combination of browns and some burnt orange and some reds. For the reds, you'll see pink, and you're like, that's not red, that's not bold red at all. Well, when I'm playing with my reds and Copic markers, I want really deep differences in my colors. So you see me using this kind of reddy pink, a really bold burgundy, and a sharp bold red, and it gives me the color variation and shading that I wanted for my apples here to get the kind of color that I think the apple should have, and yet play with the color combinations for fall that I like, that bold, rich, beautiful apple color. For my pumpkins, I actually needed a little bit wider range of markers. So you're going to see me work with the YR20 series, so it's the 21, 24, and 27, but it doesn't punch the orange out enough. So I actually pull in this YR15 to drop in some real bright orange hues through the muted orange colors, and then I get the kind of perfect orange for fall for me. I'm just dropping in the tiniest little hint of green because, you know, pumpkin stems are green. Now you'll see with the pumpkin barrel, I continuously use a really dark walnut, dark hue of brown. And with the wheelbarrow, I'm going to do more of a straw brown. And with the ground covering, I'm going to use kind of more of a medium, but yet rich brown color. And I'm going to do this consistently across all three mediums. For Copic, I thought it'd be really fun, instead of just doing some highlights and lowlights, if I dropped in some speckling like dirt would be, because dirt isn't necessarily one consistent color, it's a variation of browns that make up a pretty color. So I dropped in a whole hue of just kind of speckles to give that ground covering some texture. I ended up needing just a little bit more than I originally thought. I ended up having to pull out an extra marker just to get some more variation in hues, but I love how it turned out in the end. I tried to do my shadowing here with the browns, but ended up needing to pull out some grays in the end, and there's the Copic medium for my favorite falls. Now I'm going to pull out a piece of Bristol vellum paper and my Derwent Drawing Colored Pencils. I have so many different types of colored pencils, but I love the Derwent Drawing Pencils for a project that's fall based because the whole collection is very, very earth toned. It's very muted is not the color because they're very bold colors, but it's meant very much for like a scenic scape. So there's a lot of earthy tones within the collection, which is perfect for my fall colors today. I pulled out a combination of colored pencils, and when I color with my colored pencils, I go from my darkest hues and drop in my strongest shadows. Then I fill in with my midtones, and then I highlight with my light tones. Finally, I'll pull out a really light color, and in this case I'm using a wheat, which is kind of a linen color, or a white colored pencil and I burnish my colored pencils. So I smooth things out and lose some of the texture. There are projects I do in which I actually want the texture, but here you can actually watch me burnish it out. By pressing a little bit harder with this lighter color, you're going to lose some of that texture and gain just a little bit more richness and depth within the colored pencils. And I really do enjoy this technique. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who use colored pencils that use very, very different techniques than I do. And that is great. This isn't always the technique I use with colored pencils, but in this case, because I wanted some real depth of color, I went from darkest to lightest and then some burnishing. In the reds, I did not have the boldness red that I needed, so I actually pulled out my Prismacolors and pulled out my true red and just kind of burnished with the red colored pencil itself. Now, where I couldn't get the colors I wanted from the red with this collection of colored pencils, for the orange, I absolutely had the colors I needed. I started with an almost brown and moved into two lighter orange colors, one that's a little bit brighter than the other, and actually finished off, believe it or not, with a yellow ochre. The yellow ochre gave me the highlights and some of those yellow tones that pumpkins are known for, and I was actually able to burnish my color with the yellow ochre. I pull back out the Chinese white pencil here because the pumpkins needed a little bit of highlights and the apples just needed a little bit more burnishing just to smooth things out. For the ground, the speckle technique that I use with my alcohol markers wasn't going to work. So instead, I was just going to layer colors and then burnish it down to create some richness and texture within the ground. So I'm using a kind of combination of brown colored pencils here just to create some depth, and laid my shadows in, believe it or not, just with the black colored pencil. And now I'm going to pull out a nice light shade and burnish it down everything, and you're going to still see the layers of brown coming through the ground, and I love the shadow underneath the bucket's not the word. The wood barrel, that's the word I'm looking for. I'm looking for the wood barrel. But that shadow came out perfectly. And there you go. There's how I played with this color combination with my colored pencils. So there's Copic and colored pencils. Now on to the watercolor. I pulled out a piece of pretty decent but not brilliantly wonderful watercolored paper, and then I pulled out my Prima Watercolors in both Tropics and Decadent Pies. They both have a nice combination of browns. I'm not putting the color combinations up that I'm not listing the colors I used here because I mixed almost everything. Everything is a combination of colors that you can find in both the Tropics and the Decadent Pie watercolor cases. And it's a combination of the browns, the reds, and the oranges. Nothing else, like I wasn't pulling green into it or anything like that. Probably should have, in hindsight, now that I think about it. If I'd laid some green into my brown textures, I might have ended up a little bit more with what I wanted. The red watercolor from the Tropicals pack is way too pink, so I kept dropping brown into it just to try to get some of that bold red. And I actually got exactly the color I wanted, except for I forgot that watercolor dries back significantly. I didn't forget, I just wasn't thinking. Watercolor dries back significantly lighter than it is when it's wet, so you need to go actually darker and bolder if you're going to get the color you want. I'm not particularly pleased with how the apples came out. However, I get the pumpkins almost exactly where I want them in the end. I am not the world's greatest watercolorist. I wish I was better, and because it's this catch-22. I'm sure so many of you can relate. I want to be better at watercoloring. To be better at watercoloring, I must watercolor. However, because I'm not great at it, I tend not to watercolor. Yeah, it's this ugly catch-22, so I just need to kind of suck it up and be brave and bold and watercolor so much more to get better at it. Because I'm not going to get better at it just by wanting to. So today was one of those days that I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be brave and be bad because I'm not great at this. I'm trying to add some more depth and dimension to the apples and round them out. I didn't get there. It kind of became mud. I don't know, I probably should have grabbed a white colored pencil and added some highlights to the apples just to, yeah. For the ground layer, the ground covering, I'm sorry, I go off screen here. I realized that speckling was actually going to be work in my advantage because I laid down some wet paint and then I speckled on some darker wet paint and ended up with a ground that wasn't too bad. To finish off the rest of the card, I pulled all 3 now dry pieces out. Okay, it's not quite dry, but it's almost dry. And I pulled out my paper cutter and trimmed off each of the papers so they were only 3 inches wide, or high, 3 inches high. They're standard A2 card width wide, which is the 4.25 inches, but only 3 inches high. And then I pulled out some from my mini eons of craft paper hoarding. I pulled out a piece of orange and red paper to really highlight the red in the oranges. I think the brown stands out for itself. And cut 1/2 inch strips of both the red and the orange, and then started adhering everything to my A2 card frame. I skip a lot of this because I think we all know how to adhere paper to a card. I clearly don't because I'm having to go about this in such a bad way. Oh, I wasn't thinking, and so I ended up having to assemble. Anyway, it got done. And then I realized I had a whole bunch of boring white on the top of the page. The stamp set that I was using has some really cool leaves, so I pulled out a collection of brown distress inks and started just stamping leaves onto the top of the card, which then really allowed me to play up the browns within the card because it's a combination of all 3 browns that I use, that kind of straw brown, the walnut brown, and just kind of your mid-grade rich brown. And I was able to stamp the leaves out. And then I wanted to add the sentiment, and the sentiment I use is also from the Inspired by Stamping stamp set. This is the Autumn Harvest stamp set, and I stamped autumn, and I stamped it out in, again, some distress oxide because it stamps so well. And then I stamped out the word blessing in an orange color, so now I'm really, really, really using my fall color palette successfully. And there we go. 1 card, 3 mediums, 3 different ways of creating the same look with the same color palette, but using 3 different mediums to do it. And I think I got pretty close to matching all my colors despite the fact all 3 palettes were different. Make sure you hop on to the next stop along the blog, give some love, give some thumbs up and likes along the way, and let me know in the comments below which of the 3 mediums ended up being your favorite. I'll let you know after everybody responds what my favorite of these 3 were. Thanks for tuning in today, and happy crafting!